During my years at the UNFPA, I spoke to chapters in several cities around the country. So I've seen the UNA USA in action. I know how you have helped people in the United States to understand how the UN works, and that the UN has initiated very many important changes. I think something that is not so known in the USA and maybe not even around the world. You know, some of the things that we now take for granted were initiated at the United Nations. For example, the whole issue of human rights, and including women's rights, was done at the United Nations. Now it's become standard. All the freedom movements and the liberation movements use the Human Rights Declaration as the basis for their charters. But of course, they often forget them once they become independent and start ruling. The importance of population issues and how important it was to address this issue was really initiated at the UN, but with the key leadership of the United States. And I think at that time it was a totally bipartisan support for population issues to be addressed in the United Nations. And the first funding for the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, came from the United States, which matched all the other donors in the late 60s and early 70s. Thinking about women's rights is initiated in the UN from the first conference in 1974 to the present day. And of course, the importance of population and of the environment, now of security, of HIV and AIDS. Remember, Senator Richard Holbrooke, the late senator, had a hearing on security and HIV/AIDS at the Security Council, which put really HIV/AIDS on the global map. And all this advocacy was really, a lot of it, the work of the United States. Under your new executive director, Patrick Madden, I'm sure that you will now become even more effective than ever. This is also a very important opportunity for me to welcome your new partnership with the United Nations Foundation and the Better World Foundation. I'm very honored to be on the board of the UN Foundation and the Better World Foundation, and to say a personal thank you to Ted Turner and Tim Worth. Their support over the years have made my personal work at the United Nations so much easier in so many different ways, and has had a tremendous impact on all the issues that we all care about, and also that we promote in many different ways. I have worked at the United Nations, as Gillian says, maybe she didn't say, for over 40 years, and we have seen dramatic changes in that time. The first and most obvious is that there are twice as many people in the world as when I joined the UNFPA in 1971. We will pass 7 billion this year. The second is that doubling world population hasn't produced any of the catastrophes that many experts predicted. In fact, not only are there more people than ever before, but many of them now living at a higher standard than ever before. Their incomes are higher, they eat better. You know, populations in China, in India, the emerging countries, they pulled something like 30% or 40% of their populations out of poverty, what was called immense poverty. But you know that the news is not all good. A recent Oxfam report highlighted rising food prices and growing food insecurity in poor countries, and really highlighted the fact that there will be a food shortage unless we do something about it. In 2009, for the first time, the number of hungry people in the world went over 1 billion people. The British government's chief science advisor says that the world was facing a perfect storm of crises. He highlighted food, water, energy, in a time of rising population and rising expectations. I think that's something that we don't talk about enough, the rising expectations in all the developing countries of the world to really become like the United States. And this is done by the international media and, the access to media in all parts of the world, which is progress, but also means a bigger pressure on countries to do more for their populations. By 2030, we will have added another billion people. We will need to produce 50% more food. At the same time, we will need 50% more energy, 30% more fresh water. So think about all of these issues which will impact the United States and which need the UN leadership if we are to try to resolve them, because you might think that the UN is a place where people just talk and argue, etc., but it is the place where the international community, all the governments of the world, finally come to consensus and agreement, and that's how issues then get addressed in an impartial manner. And I want to tell you here, since you are here in the United States, that the US leadership, its moral leadership, its scientific leadership has been a key in all these sectors in making those changes happen. And somehow, we need to recreate that spirit of leadership in the US, working with the United Nations to address the world issues that will be so important for us in the coming years. The same pattern of good news and bad news can be seen in my own field. Our work has spanned over 40 years in showing tangible results. I think one of the great success stories of the United Nations has been the United Nations Population Fund. When it was started with, as I said, the leadership of the US, the fertility levels were like 6 or 7 child per family in the developing countries. Only 8 or 10 countries had policies, and only that number, in fact, allowed family planning. Family planning was the taboo subject in most of the countries of the world in 1969-70 when the UN Population Fund was created. You see the power of leadership of the US, of many other countries. By 1980, every country in the world had population policies and had family planning programs, some in spite of the fact that they had laws, etc., preventing access to contraceptive, etc., but they all addressed them and changed laws, did so many things, and all in the course of just a very short span of time in the history of issues and the United Nations and the world. Our work is showing tangible results. The United Nations has helped countries to forge an enduring global consensus on population and development, including sexual and reproductive health and rights. Maternal mortality, which was not an important subject before 1994, is now addressed and talked about by all the leaders of the world. Everyone talks about the high level of maternal mortality and how terrible it is and how sinful almost, and so many other words, that this is allowed to happen when all these deaths could be prevented. Maternal mortality is now down about 40% compared with 1994, and family planning programs now reaches over 65%. I'm talking about modern methods. Over 65% of the women who need and who want it. But still, the gap is 35%, and these are mostly in the developing world. Many countries have achieved or will achieve parity in girls' and boys' education by 2015. All the East Asian countries, some of the larger countries, but still not so many, not everyone still has access to universal education or universal basic education. At the same time, progress is quite patchy. Amongst the economic leaders are the countries that invested in women's education and reproductive health and health early on. But many countries, especially the poorest, and poor women in all countries, lag far behind. Women's literacy rates are still much lower than men's. Pregnancy and childbirth are still a major risk when it could be. This is, in fact, maternal mortality rates are the single biggest differential between developing and developed countries. Pregnancy, at the same time, unmet demand for family planning is enormous and rising rapidly. You can see that, there are so many millions of women who still want family planning, at least 200 million women around the world, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and in parts of South Asia, who don't have access to these services. For poor women in some of the developing countries, especially the least developed, the situation has changed hardly at all since their mother's time. My own area of work now, as Secretary General's Special Advisor on HIV and AIDS, I found that, when I first started doing this in Asia, and it was really because Asian levels were quite low prevalence, but it was a huge population, and it was an area where if the epidemic became anywhere like the African, there would be, many times the millions of people affected. But I found in my work, other than the fact that policy, etc., was not being addressed, but wherever there were programs, that the most at risk to HIV were women whose needs were just not being addressed. The good news here is that action and awareness in HIV/AIDS has increased tremendously. Some of you might have followed the recent high-level meeting on HIV and AIDS, which was to review the 2001 goals agreed at the United Nations on HIV and AIDS, that there has been a huge amount of progress. First of all, there's been this global advocacy, which has resulted in a lot of resources for HIV and AIDS. 2 US initiatives were PEPFAR and the President's Emergency Fund for AIDS relief, and the setting up of the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and malaria, which was also an initiative led by the US, but also by all the other major donors, have spearheaded a tremendous increase in resources. And the meeting, the high-level meeting that was just recently concluded, was really very complimentary on the work of the UN-AIDS on addressing the epidemic. It showed that in 14 of the most affected countries, the number of new infections is really coming down. There were no people on treatment in 2001. Now there are more than 12 million almost on treatment, and we are well on our way to getting all those that need treatment on it. When I started my work at the UN Special Envoy of AIDS in Asia about 7 years ago, only Thailand had an HIV and AIDS policy and program. Now every country has one, every Asian country has one. In those days, most countries were unwilling to recognize the rights of people living with HIV or those at most risk for the disease. The highly vulnerable groups, such as men who have sex with men, sex workers, intravenous drug users, were ignored in the programs of HIV and AIDS, and they were just very stigmatized. Our recent meeting at the United Nations now has forced countries to recognize the right to health of everybody, and including the right to protection from HIV infection with the knowledge, information, and the means. There is much more emphasis today now on the needs of girls. The goal of 100% coverage in preventing mother-to-child transmission of the virus looks realistic today. And there are now many more scientific advances that give us a lot of hope one of them at the US mission, where they had a panel on HIV/AIDS, had Dr. Fauci addressing the meeting, and he talked about many scientific advances that are going to happen, which can really, really turn the tide of the epidemic. But there is still bad news. There are enormous gaps in coverage in the worst affected countries, and a crucial lack of preventive care in almost all countries. Some of the groups most at risk, for example, young people, are the least likely to be provided with education, access to services. Young women in particular are terribly ill-informed about HIV and AIDS. The results are horrifying. For example, 75% of new infections in Africa are among women 15 to 24, compared to only 60% for men of comparable ages, which means that these women are getting infected by probably older men, because the infection rates in their cohorts of men is not the same level. The mixture of good news and bad news suggests some possible approaches. I'm sure that all of you must have heard about the MDGs, and if you haven't, I'm sure Gillian will tell you about them. I think they have captured the imagination of all the countries of the world, and every country is really striving to achieve these goals. The MDGs have identified, poverty, gender equality, education, health, women's health, children's health, HIV, and all of those goals. And I think that those goals have formed a common bond within the United Nations community of trying to get to them as soon as possible. I think that many of these goals are going to slip in the time period, but certainly I think most countries are trying to get plans and resources to do this. But you can see that, the struggle of the poor countries needs a lot of support. Everything is connected. There is a common factor linking poverty, food insecurity, poor health, lack of attention to women's needs. In the poorest countries, women not only cook the food, they grow it and trade it too. And HIV/AIDS has affected food production in some of the countries of Africa. Yet they often still have little support for all the things they do. Women don't have the security of tenure for the land they work, land ownership, inheritance. All the laws have been changed and they are on the books, but they are not actually implemented. And so then the implementation of the laws requires a whole sea change in social attitudes, social thinking, which is something more difficult to do than just passing laws. And this is where we have to continue to focus our work. You see where I am going with this. A serious approach to problems of all those issues that are addressed in the MDGs starts with the people and giving attention to all of the people in the developing world. And here the developed world needs to be a strong partner. Many countries would like slower population growth. The solution is also to give women the power to choose when and whether they'll become pregnant, to offer them a guarantee of good health and safe childbirth, because many of the families have children because they're not sure how many will survive. Women know the need to protect themselves. They know the importance of preventing mother-to-child transmission against HIV and AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases, but they're not often empowered to do this. They don't come to be tested in antenatal clinics, or don't come for delivery to the hospital if they know they are HIV, because of the stigma attached to HIV. Again, a whole lot of work that needs to be done. As you may or may not know, women in the developing countries are more stigmatized when they get HIV than men. In cases in India, in some village, for example, the woman got the 95% of women get the infection from their spouses. But for example, a woman in India was stoned to death when she was found to have HIV when she went to an antenatal clinic, and for infecting her husband, a real double irony when in fact she had been infected, and then she was thrown out and finally she was killed. The solution is to give women more power. Solution is to be a partnership. One of the MDG goals is to have a partnership on key issues, to work together to do that. I think the issue of women's empowerment is a universal issue, and it even an issue, I would say, in the developed countries of the world. In fact, violence against women is worldwide. It's not just confined to developing countries. I think most of the studies show that. And they show that most of the 90% of the violence is committed by someone that the girl or the woman knows. So again, we have a partnership at the world level, at the global level, to work on these issues together. Then the whole issue of human rights. I think that's an issue which unites all of us. These are shared values that we must push. In other words, all these people, like I use the focus on women, but also poor people need empowerment, equality, and social justice. And that is something the United Nations can push with the support of all the countries of the world. Now there is the agreement on the responsibility to protect, which the UN had great difficulty in getting through because sovereignty of nations is so strong politically in the United Nations. But since the Charter of the United Nations says we the people, I think it's now been accepted that wherever people are at threat, the United Nations can be asked to step in. And I think the Libya situation is a case in point. In fact, of course, it is much easier to say that these things than to bring them about, but it is the only solution for all of us to work together. And here I think that the leadership of the United Nations is absolutely essential. And I think investment in women is absolutely imperative. As always, the United Nations provides the essential forum for discussion and mechanism for action. As always, the United Nations is the United States is the essential nation. As Madeleine Albright put it, to lead the debate, building a consensus and moving to action. The women of the world rely on the United Nations, the poor people of the world rely on the United Nations, and they both rely on the United States to give an example of empowerment and equality, to lead the charge for human rights. The Secretary of State is a wonderful supporter, your Secretary of State, a wonderful supporter, an example of a leader in the whole issue of women's rights, but she has a lot of other things on her plate, and she certainly needs your help. A rejuvenated and focused UNA-USA will be of immeasurable value to people in cities, towns, all across America. And I say this, America, not just in the world. You're already helping to shape local responses to global challenges. You can show Americans that the UN works, and you are succeeding. Surveys are showing now, I think after a long time, that over 80% of the Americans support the United Nations. I thank you for your wonderful work in the past and present, and I wish you all success in the future. Thank you very much.